Introduce to you Indiana author Mrs. Jean Stratton Porter. Mrs. Porter has published 10 novels, including A Girl of the Limberlost, The Harvester, and Laddie, all of which have been on the bestseller list, selling over 8 million copies worldwide. Her 7 nature study books, which feature her own beautiful photographs, include What I Have Done with Birds, Music of the Wild, and Moths of the Limberlost. Though lesser known than her novels, these books have been praised for introducing people of all kinds to the beauty nature has to offer. Mrs. Porter now lives in Los Angeles, California, where she has founded the Jean Stratton Porter Productions and is producing moving pictures, soon to be called movies, of her best-selling novels. As a founding member of several national conservation clubs, Mrs. Porter has been instrumental in the conservation movement. Today, Mrs. Porter is here to share with us her lessons of the Limberlost. Before we begin, please know bathrooms are over there, and turn off your phones or at least silence them. And without further ado.
Thank you for that kind introduction. Thank you for inviting me here today to share my lessons of the Limberlost. Today I'm going to share a little bit about my history and what has inspired my novels, my poetry, my nature studies, and most importantly, why we must pay heed to the lessons of the Limberlost. Now, for those of you who aren't familiar with the Limberlost Swamp, what little that's left of it is about 100 miles northeast of here. It's just right along the Wabash River. Now, when Mr. Porter and I moved to Geneva in 1890, the Limberlost at that time was huge. It was over 13,000 acres. And just to give you a point of comparison, this lovely park and the reservoir are less than half of that size. Now, if you were to ask Mr. Porter, he would certainly tell you, when we moved to Geneva at that time, the dangers of the Limberlost were no joke. And there were many excellent reasons why I should not have gone in there. Most of it was impenetrable at that time. And there were few, if any, roads, and it was a notorious rendezvous site for cutthroats and outlaws of all types. Limberlost, in case you were wondering about the name, it was named for a lumberman named Limber Jim. And Limber Jim got lost. Tricky, right? When Limber Jim got lost, his friends, the men in Geneva of the lumber company, they called out, "Limber's lost, Limber's lost." And they organized a search party, but he was not found, ever. And they assumed that he died of starvation. And just like that failed search for Limber Jim, the lessons of the Limberlost are sadly much about failure. Because just like Limber Jim is dead, so too is the Limberlost today. The first time I heard the word dead, I was 5 years old, and I was living on Hopewell Farm in LaGrow, Indiana. I was the 12th, the last, and least expected of the children in my family. And like many last children in a family as large as mine, I was often left to my own devices and my own entertainments. I was a barefoot and happy child. I tagged along with my brothers and father. I followed them everywhere, out into the fields, the forest, the orchard. And it was there in the orchard that I had my first encounter with death. I found a woodpecker. It was lying on the grass just beneath one of our cherry trees, and I just didn't understand why it didn't fly off like the others that were gathered around the fruit on that tree. So I approached it slowly. It still didn't move. So I scooped it up into my apron. I was only 5. I took it to the loft in our barn, and I spread his wings out, and I tossed him out. I thought he would feel like he was leaving the nest. But he wasn't, and he did not fly. Discouraged, I sat on the front steps of our house, and I was just wondering, what could I do to help this poor bird? Well, my father passed by, so I began asking him questions about it. And he explained to me that although he instructed my brothers never to shoot the songbirds, the woodpeckers made no music. And so he told them to shoot the woodpeckers dead. He said that they took a distressingly large quantity of the fruit that we would have had otherwise. Well, it was then that I made my first business proposition. I told my father if he would make my brothers stop shooting those birds, I would give them my share. I would give them all of my cherries if they would just stop shooting them. Let me tell you, from that instant on, cherries had never looked so good to me. They were black and red and dripping with tart fruit. And I was sorely put to the test when our cook that week, she made every cherry delight you can imagine. Monday it was Cherry Betty. Wednesday it was Cherry Buckle. But on Sunday, it was my favorite, cherry pie. It almost broke my heart, but I put my hands behind my back and I stepped away from that awful temptation with tears in my eyes. At that point, my sweet mother intervened and she told them that we had quite enough cherries for all of our needs, and she gave me my share of that pie. But my friends, as we face the ongoing loss of bird and fowl and animal habitat, let me tell you, there is not enough. And there will be no sweet mother to intercede on our behalf. We must be true to our word. We must stand fast against those types of temptation. They're short-term gains. They try to tempt us by destroying the very water and the land that feeds us all. All in the name of greed? No, my friends, we must stand fast. Another time, I heard the crack of a shotgun, and rushing out to the yard following the sound, I found my father had just shot a chicken hawk. And as I came around the corner, he was just about to brain it. And I threw myself in front of that bird, and I said, "Stop, stop." And he cried, "Are you mad? I almost brained you." But I stood my ground, and I told my father I would rather that he strike me than that he would injure that bird any further. And I begged him to let me save it. He warned me sorely that that hawk was going to tear me to bits. But he knew the only way that I would learn was to let me have it. And indeed, I did suffer more than a few nasty gashes, but soon I had that hawk settled and I was able to splint his wing, and he fully recovered. Well, he was never able to fly again. Oh, but he would follow me around everywhere that I went. There he'd be right behind me following like he was a little puppy. And my mother, she was so proud of me and my dedication, my hard work. She called me her little bird woman, and the name just stuck. In fact, if you're a reader of my novels, you'll recognize a certain character by the name Bird Woman, who bears more than a striking resemblance to yours truly. Well, Seeing that I was wholly dedicated to my passion, my father gave me the greatest gift of my lifetime. He took me upon his knee and he gave me ownership of all the birds on Hopewell Farm. I could scarcely believe my fortune. I had property. I now owned the hummingbirds in their gorgeous green satin with ruby jeweled throats, the plucky little brown wren that would sing by the hour, the cardinals, the orioles, they were all mine. I could scarcely believe my fortune at that time. I selected 64 nests for daily observation and care of those within. Stealthily, I would watch what each mother would bring to her babies. It was insects for the wrens, grubs for my red-winged blackbirds, and caterpillars for my tanagers. I fought off snakes and squirrels and cats. I truly was their protector. And soon I could feed nearly all of them by hand. Those birds, they were my friends. They were my pets. They were my dollies. In fact, when Hezekiah was a little he was a little blue jay who fell out of the nest, I made him a tiny little pair of pantaloons. And he would ride around on my shoulder. Imagine, I've got Hezekiah in his tiny little pants and my chicken hawk following behind like a puppy. I was quite a sight. I even taught our rooster, Bobby. I taught him how to crow on demand. And do you know what the word was? Amen. And that was a word that was said in our household quite frequently. My idyllic life came to an end when my dearest brother Leander drowned in the Wabash River. He was goaded, he was taunted into trying to swim across it. He wasn't a strong swimmer, ever. He just didn't make it. And the loss of Laddie, it broke my mother's heart. She became desperately ill. We were forced to move out of our beautiful Hopewell Farm into the town of Wabash. That way my mother could be closer to her doctors. And I'll tell you, no more was I that barefoot and happy child. At 11 years old, I was buckled into shoes and stuffed into starchy dresses, and I had to leave behind my birds and go to school every single day. It was terrible. And worse, it wasn't long before my mother passed away. I thought we would go back to Hopewell Farm, but without Laddie, my father just couldn't take care of the farm all on his own. It was decided, without my input, that we would stay in the town of Wabash. I never stopped missing my beloved Hopewell Farm. In fact, many years later, when I was financially independent, I thought maybe I would buy back the old home place and I would rejuvenate it. That was another lesson in failed conservation. I'll tell you, the woods, the orchards, everything that had sheltered my beautiful birds, it was gone. The woods and forests were timbered out. The fence rows were plowed under. Even the streams were ditched and tiled, and there was nothing as far as the eye could see but flat fields. Can farmers not see that by removing all of the habitat for birds, they are bringing on more work for themselves? Where once birds thrived, they lived on the mosquitoes, the grubs, and the bugs. Well, now the farmers had to spend their own time, their own effort, and their own money dispensing pesticides, where once the birds did it for free. No, my friends, I can tell you, once you've lost your home, you can never go back. This is exactly why we must preserve and sustain the land and the water that we have. For once it is gone, we too will have no home. You might be wondering about this stick. Well, it was the result of an accident that I had as a young girl in Wabash. I caught my foot in a grate as I was walking downtown, and I fell so hard and I hit my head, I was nearly a goner. But they were able to save me, but it came at the cost of my hair. The doctors had to shave off a tremendous amount of it just to sew up my head. And because of the way my foot had twisted, I was forced to use a cane. I don't have to use it all of the time, but whenever I'm on uneven surfaces, I need it. So imagine, during my recovery, I went to Sylvan Lake with my sister just as part of my recovery. And let me tell you, there I was with my shorn hair and a limp and a stick. You, like most people there, probably would not have thought that I was the it girl. But a certain Mr. Porter did. He wanted to make my acquaintance right then and there, but he had no one there to make a formal introduction for him. A few weeks later, though, in the mail, Mr. Porter took the unusual step of introducing himself. Though he was 13 years my senior, he was interesting and entertaining. He was also quite well positioned. He was a druggist, you see. He had 2 drugstores, one in Fort Wayne and one in Geneva. We corresponded vigorously. Every day it was letters and letters. And soon, well, by soon I mean about 2 years, he started to hint at engagement. Well, he said that he had concluded that he would be very happily married with a woman such as myself. Well, I very quickly sent my reply and I said, "You have concluded that you favor matrimony? Well, so do I. For the men." I told him, I sincerely believe that 9 out of every 10 girls who strive to make a home such as the one that I imagine have killed themselves at it. To lay on a girl's shoulders the management, the planning of a house. Oh, and then she'll cook, she'll clean, she'll wash, she'll bake, she'll iron, she scrubs, she makes beds and dusts and sweeps. And don't forget, she has to do it all with a smile and cheer. I take note that my girlfriends who have been married a year look vastly different than those who have been engaged for a year. It sets me to pondering about the difference between a man's engaged love and his married love. But you may have guessed, he did still want me for his bride. Even with my forthrightness, he won me over. Now, you might also notice that I did not fully revoke my independence when we wed. I retained my father's name, and I simply tacked Mr. Porter's right along to it. And although that was far from common at that time, Mr. Porter knew I too was quite uncommon. We moved to the Porter homestead in Decatur. Soon, baby Jeanette was born. Just as I had correctly predicted in those love letters, I was indeed the mother, the cook, the cleaner, the housewife, I did it all. I had no domestic help, while Mr. Porter took the train thrice a week to Fort Wayne or to Geneva. And he didn't even return home every night. Well, I did take care of the toddler, and I cooked and cleaned, and I managed to keep the household accounts. But none of it thrilled my soul, to say the very least. And I became desperate for company. But I remembered my little friends, the birds, and I began to apply the same skills that I had learned as a child on Hopewell Farm. I would step out quietly, and I would observe them without disturbing them, but I would feed them each by hand. And soon, I had a whole flock. I had cages all over that house. My sister Florence, she knew how in love I was with birds. She gave me a parrot named Major. And Parrot, he was so amazing. He was trained to sing along with my piano as if he was a flute. It was amazing. I began to plan a family concert because my flock of birds would follow along with me. It didn't matter if I was on my piano, on my violin, even on my sewing machine. It was amazing. So I began to plan a concert for my family. I was so excited. But it was then that there was a crushing blow, the news of my father's death. My slight glimmer of happiness was snuffed out entirely. I no longer took pleasure in the song of a caged bird. I let them all go free. All except for Major, of course. He wouldn't know what to do on his own, how to survive, any better than Jeanette would have. So of course I kept him. Well, Mr. Porter took note of my deep sadness, and he took me to the World's Fair in Chicago. It was amazing. We took in all of the sights of White City. We immersed ourselves in everything that fair had to offer. It was incredible. And on the ride home, Mr. Porter hinted that perhaps we could make plans for a new home that was inspired by those redwood buildings that we had seen at the World's Fair. You see, the 365-acre farm that Mr. Porter had next to the Limberlost Swamp, it was now producing oil. And the Geneva drugstore was doing quite well. So I threw myself wholeheartedly into the plan. I made every drawing, I made every plan for every stitch of that house. And though my grief didn't lessen over the next 2 years, I just simply overwhelmed it, overseeing the design and the construction, the furnishing of our new home. We called it the Limberlost Cabin. It was beautiful. Now by this time, Jeanette was getting older, and she was growing up, and so she was away attending school in Wabash. For the first time in years, I found myself with the luxury of time on my own. Come on through, my friend. You're fine.
Thank you.
I needed a drink. I had the luxury of time on my own. I began to spend hours in the nearby Limberlost Swamp. I would take hundreds and hundreds of field notes and my observations of everything that I saw. I often would paint those observations with my watercolors. My friends, you cannot imagine all the marvels that a swamp can hold. Yes, of course it was full of disagreeable creatures. It was fetid and stank and there were swarms of mosquitoes. But for all of that, it was also carpeted in the most luxurious moss. There were delicate ferns, jewel weeds, queen of the prairie, even Indian ghost pipe. There was every flower that is native to this area. In the sky overhead, it would turn black with the number of passenger pigeons that would go over. It was all glorious to me, and I loved it. I knew exactly where I could walk that I might not sink to my knees in mud, and how to avoid the quicksand, for the most part. But I always did carry my pistol with me in my pocket of my skirt or my breeches for my protection. I could have stayed there all day, but I always returned back to the house to provide meals, make and mend clothes, keep our home immaculate, for the most part. Well, one evening, it was close to Christmas and Jeanette was home. We were enjoying a lovely oyster stew. That night, our parrot Major, he would not be satisfied. He was, of course, at his chair at the table, as always. But that night, he wouldn't stop squawking and fussing and carrying on. He wasn't satisfied with his usual crackers. Well, he squawked and fussed and carried on and all of that until Jeanette finally, she scooped up an oyster from the stew and she offered it to him. Can you imagine? He took that oyster in his claw and he ate it with such relish. I couldn't help but to exclaim, I wish I had a camera. I would love to have a photograph of a parrot eating an oyster. Well, unbeknownst to me, Jeanette and her father exchanged a glance, and they hatched a plan. And that year, for Christmas, I received my very first camera. Jeanette had bought it with her own money. I was delighted. I quickly converted our downstairs bathroom into a dark room, and I taught myself how to develop all of the pictures that I took. My tools were probably unlike any others that were used. I washed my prints in the kitchen sink, and I let them all dry in turkey platters in my kitchen.